My name is Claire Bennett, I'm 36, and for years I was the daughter nobody had to worry about, which is another way of saying the daughter nobody thought about at all. 8 years ago, my parents' roof was failing and their savings were gone after my younger brother Mark's restaurant collapsed. I was the one with a steady paycheck as a project manager in Denver, so when the bank gave them 30 days before their mortgage payment doubled, I stepped in. I refinanced, nothing myself. I simply started sending money. $1,400 a month, every month on autopay, so I would never talk myself out of it. I added my mother to my phone plan. I covered her car insurance. When the furnace died, I paid for that too, quietly, without asking for anything on paper, because every time I brought up putting my name on the house, my mother would get a hurt look and say the house would be mine eventually. Why complicate it with lawyers? I believed her for 8 years. Then last February, she texted that the family needed to sit down with their estate attorney, and something in me lit up like a kid getting picked for a team. I thought, finally, they see everything I've done. I took the day off and drove 3 hours with a folder of insurance papers and account summaries, thinking I was there to help organize things. When I walked into that office, my brother Mark was already sitting there in a suit he never wears, next to our Aunt Carol, both of them with coffee already poured. My parents wouldn't quite meet my eyes. The attorney, a soft-spoken older man named Douglas Reyes, opened a folder and read through a revocable trust that placed the house, both vehicles, and every account into Mark's name alone, effective upon my parents' deaths. Then he read the line about me. My parents had specifically and intentionally left me nothing, and the document said it was done with love. My mother held my hand through the entire reading and told me nothing had to change between us. My father stared out the window like the parking lot had personally wronged him. When I asked why, it was Aunt Carol who answered instead of my own parents. She said Mark had children who needed stability, and I had always been the strong one who didn't need help. My mother nodded along and said family gathers where the need is greatest, and Mark would fill that house with grandchildren. Mark himself leaned back and told me I could still come for Thanksgiving, obviously. I didn't cry in that room. I said I had a deadline back at work, which was true, and I left with my folder of papers nobody had asked to see. My father followed me out to the parking lot, moving too fast for a man with a heart condition, and by the time he caught up to me, he had to lean on my car door just to breathe. He didn't apologize. He just pressed his old garage key into my hand and told me that once my mother and Carol decided something, arguing with them was like arguing with weather. That night I sat at my kitchen table and opened my banking app and actually looked for the first time in 8 years at what I had sent. It came to well over $100,000. Mortgage payments, insurance, repairs, all of it moving quietly out of my life while I skipped vacations and kept driving a car with 200,000 miles on it. I didn't make any decision that night. I went to bed instead, because panic decisions are the ones you regret. In the morning, I canceled the mortgage autopay in 4 taps. I moved my mother's phone line off my plan effective at the end of the billing cycle I'd already paid for. I let her car insurance lapse at renewal instead of cutting it off midterm. Then I closed my laptop and didn't say a word to anyone. No angry message, no explanation. I had learned that explaining yourself to people who benefit from misunderstanding you is just another kind of payment. A full month went by, and nobody called to check on me. Not once. My mother sent exactly 2 messages that entire month, both about my niece's birthday party, nothing about the meeting, nothing about how I might be feeling. The silence told me more clearly than any argument could have that the calls I used to get were never really about me. They were about whatever needed paying. Then, on a gray Tuesday, my phone buzzed at my desk. My mother's text said only that the mortgage was late and I needed to fix it. No hello. No question about how I was doing. Just an instruction, like I was a service she'd forgotten to cancel. I looked at that message for a long time. I typed out an explanation about the meeting, about 8 years, about respect, and deleted every word of it. Then I wrote back 2 words. Not my problem. I put the phone in a drawer and went back to my spreadsheet. The phone did not stop ringing for 3 days after that. My mother's messages moved from disbelief to anger to the line I knew was coming. The the one about how the stress would be too much for my father's heart. I answered one call. She told me family doesn't keep score. I asked her, gently, why the score only ever seemed to run in one direction. She said we'd talk when I calmed down, which was interesting, since I was the only one on that call who hadn't raised her voice. She screenshotted my 2-word text and sent it to the family group chat. Within days, Aunt Carol had called to lecture me about duty and gratitude, using her church voice, the one built for casseroles and bake sales. By that weekend, I'd been quietly removed from the family chat altogether. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years texted to say she'd heard I abandoned my parents. Nobody in that version of the story mentioned 8 years of payments, because nobody but Mark and my parents actually knew about them. I had kept it invisible on purpose, thinking that was dignity. Now the invisibility was the whole case against me. Mark showed up at my office in June, standing in the lobby, holding his coat like a man trying to look humble. He asked me to be reasonable, said he was good for few payments, and then, because he could never help himself, mentioned that he and his wife had already put a deposit down on a bigger house across town, counting on how things were set up now. My parents were both alive and eating dinner under that roof, and my brother was already spending it. I told him plainly that he was spending an inheritance out of a house 2 living people still slept in, and I went back to my desk. In August, my mother called me at 4 a.m. My father had collapsed and been rushed to the hospital. I drove through the dark thinking, strangely, about nothing to do with money at all. I had stopped paying their bills, and it had cost me my place at that family's table, but I had never once stopped being his daughter, and that difference was the entire war nobody else in my family could see. At the hospital, my mother's first words to me in that hallway were to ask if I'd brought my checkbook. I told her I'd only brought myself, and that was what was left. I sat beside my father and held his hand until the sun came up. Before dawn, his eyes opened, and he pulled me close enough to hear him. He told me I was never the bill. That was all. No apology, no mention of the trust. 2 days later, he died in his sleep. At the funeral home, I overheard Aunt Carol, before he was even buried, asking the attorney's office whether my father's death changed anything in the trust. At the reception afterward, in front of 30 relatives, she said loudly that some of us had money for new cars but not for our dying father's roof, and 30 faces turned to look at me. I set down the coffee pot I'd been carrying and said, at the volume of a spoon against a saucer, that she should ask my mother what the refinance 8 years ago had actually paid for. Then I kept pouring coffee. My cousin Rachel, who worked in property records, pulled the refinance documents on her lunch break 2 days later and posted them to the family chat with no comment. The story flipped overnight. People who had called me selfish started apologizing. Mark's own wife texted me quietly to say she hadn't known about the real amount, that Mark had told her it was a small loan years ago. By October, the house was in foreclosure. My mother refused to sell it herself, calling it my father's house and saying she wouldn't let strangers walk through it, apparently preferring what the county was about to do instead. Mark had no money left to help. His deposit on the new house was gone, forfeited, and his credit cards were calling him hourly. In January, the attorney's office called me back. My mother could still save the house if the arrears were paid, just under $20,000, and if I paid it, she would sign an amendment that same day, making the house mine outright, already drafted and waiting. My mother took my hand again, exactly the way she had the day they cut me out, and told me nothing had to change. It was always going to be mine. I asked for a day to think. That night I wrote 2 columns on a legal pad. One side was full of nouns: the house, the garden my father planted, the door frame with my height marked in pencil, my mother's hands. The other side was full of facts: 8 years of payments, a document that erased me with love, a month of silence followed by a bill disguised as a text message. The nouns were beautiful. That's what nouns are for. But I understood, staring at my own handwriting, that saving the house wasn't really about the house. It was about being welcomed back into the role of the wallet with a pulse, forgiven exactly as long as I stayed useful. I drove to my father's garage that night instead of going home. On his workbench sat a porch swing he'd been building in secret, half finished, the joints cut and dry fitted. Pencil marks on the crossbeam read, "For Claire's front porch, whenever she finds home." Not the house on Maple Street. Somewhere ahead of me, unbuilt mine. That was the only apology my father ever knew how to give. The next day, I walked into the attorney's office and set down a single envelope instead of a check. Inside was a printed statement of every payment I had made over 8 years, and at the bottom, where a balance should have been, I had written "paid in full." Beside it, I placed the old brass house key I'd carried on my ring since I was 16. I told my mother I wasn't reinstating anything, that I had already paid 8 years for a seat at that table nobody had bothered to save for me, and that the house had never been the inheritance. I had been. And they had spent me. Aunt Carol came out of her chair furious, and my mother, for the first time, didn't defend herself with sweetheart. She told me about her own mother, about giving up her wedding fund to care for her, about never once being thanked, and said that was simply what daughters do. They hold the family up. I told her she was right, somebody should have thanked her for that. But she didn't get to fix that debt by billing it to me. The house sold on the courthouse steps 6 weeks later. I didn't go. I did drive my mother to her new apartment myself in a rented truck, and I helped her fill out the paperwork because I could still do that much. But I told her plainly in the truck that I would carry boxes and do paperwork forever if she needed it, but I would never again pay her to love me. This spring I bought a small house of my own outside Denver, with a porch that faces west. The mortgage payment is almost exactly what I used to send north every month. It just finally changed direction. My mother and I have coffee on Sundays now, an hour at a time, small and honest, which is more than it ever was before. She has never said she's sorry. I've stopped waiting for it. The porch swing my father built came home with me wrapped in moving blankets. I finished the joints myself over 3 weekends, and I sealed his pencil marks instead of sanding them away, because some handwriting is worth keeping. Some nights I still cry thinking about him, about the house, about my mother's warm hands. I've decided that's just the last of the old debt, finally leaving the account. If I've learned anything worth passing on, it's this. Walking away from a debt that was never truly yours isn't abandoning your family. It's the first payment you ever make toward your own life. Hello, Clued. I have already shared my story above. Based on this story, I need a complete YouTube SEO package targeting a USA audience. Please provide everything in English. A highly clickable, SEO-optimized YouTube title. A professional SEO description. SEO tags. Relevant hashtags. I also need thumbnail text. I will share my competitor's thumbnail. Please analyze it carefully and create thumbnail text in the same style, structure, and number of lines, but make it completely unique and based on my story. In addition, I need a prompt that I can give to ChatGPT to recreate my competitor's thumbnail according to my story. The prompt should instruct ChatGPT to keep the overall thumbnail layout, composition, and visual style similar. Replace the competitor's thumbnail text with the new text you created for my story, using the same color style. Replace the woman in the thumbnail with the female character I provide. Do not change her face or skin tone. Only modify her hairstyle and clothing to match my story. Mention the appropriate hairstyle and outfit in the prompt. Keep the final thumbnail in a professional, high CTR YouTube style. If I don't provide my own female character image, then use the woman from the competitor's thumbnail as the base and only change her hairstyle and outfit according to my story while replacing the text with my new thumbnail text.